Never honor, you all can hear me? Yes. We never honor the ancestors. We are people of African descent. And before we commence any talk or anything, we have to ask the ancestors' permission. So I speak in the name of my ancestors, the father of our country, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the goddess of our country, and then my grandparents, Sayil and Mocombe, who taught me the ways of my ancestors. Tonight's talk is titled Neoliberalism and the Emergence of the My Nigga Haitian Identity. Now, I tend to be in my own head, so if I say something or if I use a word you may not know, just make sure when I take some questions and answers, you ask me, because sometimes, my area of research and focus is on consciousness, the origins of consciousness, who we are, the ideas in our head, where do they come from, etc. As Dr. Liu mentioned, my most recent work is publishing a 7-volume series on consciousness. I begin with Haitian Vodou, and then I tied Haitian Vodou to physics, quantum mechanics and physics, which deals with subatomic particle, theory of general relativity by Einstein, because a lot of what Einstein and many of these theorists are saying contemporarily, they were said by our ancestors a long time ago. I'm gonna give you one quick example and then I'll head into my talk. You all know in physics contemporarily, we're trying to upload consciousness into computer. So they take the neurons, someone who's about to pass away, and they can try to upload it into computer so the person's consciousness then is in the computer. Well, our ancestors said the same thing. They said consciousness, your tibonange, is a material thing that they can capture after death. Same concept, but for some reason we marginalize one and approve of the other. But that just requires a paradigm shift. So that's the area of focus that I'm researching and publishing in contemporarily. So my theory is titled Phenomenological Structuralism, where I try to synthesize consciousness. Where does consciousness come from? And how do we exercise our consciousness in the material world? I argue there's 4 areas where consciousness comes from. What I'm going to deal with tonight is what's called structural reproduction and differentiation. What that means is a lot of what we do and the activities that we recursively organize in the material world, it's intentional. The people who are in power positions, they set up institutions to make you act and behave a certain way. We call that, in sociology, we call that structural reproduction and differentiation. So for example, our ancestors, many of them come from Africa, the Congo and the West Coast. Well, they came from different tribes when they were captured. So they weren't slaves. Many of them weren't. Many were princesses, etc. Once they were captured, they became a quote-unquote slave. A slave is a position within a structure. So they had to behave a certain way as slaves. So you all understand what I mean by, so the structure imposes the actions, what you can do, what you can't do. You all understand that? So, for example, when many of the Africans were taken to the island, they were differentiated between Bosal, which were Africans who were directly from Africa, Neg Creole, who were blacks born on the island, Neg Milat, who were mulattoes. So each identity had a particular action that they can do. There are certain things they could and could not do within the society. The Bosal, the African, could not own land. You had free blacks, Neg Creole, who could own property. For example, we all celebrate Toussaint, as a great man of the Haitian Revolution. As a free African, or what is called in literature an affranchi, you all realize that Toussaint did not want to end the slave trade. When he invited the former whites back onto the island, it was to continue the slave trade. So we pride ourselves on Toussaint. Toussaint was a slave owner. Dessalines was a slave owner. We celebrate many of our ancestors who fought in Georgia during the American Revolution, but many of them were racist. Rigaud was a racist, but we celebrate, oh, he's black. But that's because the society sets up identities that we must identify with, the practices of those identities. So those identities become part of the structure. We call that structural differentiation. The society itself structures the identities. So what I argue, I have a forthcoming book that's coming up. Following the Haitian Revolution, these identities separated in Haiti. Many of the Africans went into the mountains in the provinces. Many of the mulattoes and the free blacks, they control the cities. So what would happen is, post-1950, there is an emerging, what I call a my nigga identity that's emerging within Haitian culture, within Haitian society. And this is how it emerged. Following the revolution, the bourgeoisie, the Haitian bourgeoisie, became the dominant identity in Haiti. So the emphasis of that, remember, it's a structurally differentiated identity. The society produced it. Those with wealth, those who owned land, they became the bourgeoisie. Those who owned slaves, those who were merchants, they would trade, they were the bourgeoisie. They had a particular way of life. They emphasized education. They emphasized the French language. They emphasized literature at the expense of practical sciences, practical activities. It's the Americans who would introduce practical activities in Haiti under the Haitian occupation. But the educational system, remember, we have institutions put in place to reproduce these identities. So the bourgeoisie set up institutions to reproduce the bourgeoisie way of life. The masses became the peasantry. I hate using the peasantry because it seems as though they didn't have any, we lost our African heritage and they didn't reproduce themselves, they were just peasant farmers. But that's what the bourgeoisie differentiated into, the bourgeoisie and the peasantry. Following the Haitian Revolution, and I'm taking you up to the 20th century, what would happen is many of the bourgeoisie would immigrate to the United States, especially under Papa Doc Duvalier. They would immigrate to the United States. When they came to the United States, they were also differentiated. Because America had what's called a one-drop rule, if you had one drop of black blood, you were considered black. Because they had the one drop, the mulatto in Haiti is a mulatto, in America he's black. He or she is black, period. So they became differentiated along racial lines and they became differentiated along cultural lines. So they set up communities, many of them immigrated to places like New York, Boston, Connecticut, New Orleans. So they developed that Haitian bourgeois way of life. They emphasized education, they opened up markets, etc. This is post-Duvalier, post-1950, post-1960s, 70s, 80s. Under Aristide, immigration took a turn in America, Haitian immigration to America took a turn. Those from the peasant class started to come to America, what we would call the boat people, escaping the reactionary forces against the Aristide regime. But the difference between them and the bourgeoisie who immigrated earlier to the United States is that the bourgeoisie, when they immigrated, they moved to the suburbs of this country. The Haitian peasantry, when they immigrated, they immigrated amongst the ghetto population in this country, the inner cities, because they didn't have much means when they immigrated to places like Florida, New York, New Jersey, etc. So what happened, especially in the Haitian community, there was a thing was, oh, why stop acting like a black American? Early on, those who immigrated, they also pushed education. But there was a shift that happened in American society where there was a time where we marginalized the black underclass culture. If you were rapping, if you were pantalon sudeo, your family marginalized that. But what happened post-1980s, because what we call neoliberalism, which is based on liberal philosophies of privatization, financialization, etc., we started to celebrate that. So the means to success in American society was no longer tied to education, etc. It became tied to financialization, money. So for example, now we celebrate Jay-Z. Jay-Z doesn't even have I don't believe he has a high school diploma. We celebrate people who didn't go to college, but they have money. They came from the urban underclass, and they brought that urban culture with them when they became successful. Well, that also took a turn within the Haitian community. In the Haitian community, whereas we used to celebrate those docteur, avocat, ingénieur, nurse, etc., that's what counted as being successful. But then there is a shift in the 80s that took place where you have the emergence of Wyclef Jean, the emergence of Kodak Black, the emergence of many of these young Haitians who grew up in the inner cities. They adopted the inner city underclass culture, and they became successful doing so. So now, what's happening in Haitian culture is the emergence of what I call the my nigga Haitian identity. So now not only is the bourgeoisie celebrated within the Haitian culture, but the my nigga identity is also celebrated. The emphasis becomes Creole. If you look at what's happening this weekend with Haitian Flag Day, the my nigga identity will celebrate the flag, not know the history of the flag. It will celebrate griot, eating banan, etc. Not know the history of anything. They can't tell you the history of Haiti, but they'll celebrate the flag. So it's an emergence of this structural identity that is tied to the capitalist social system. Now, why is that important? Why must we look at that, and should we marginalize it? Should we accept it? The problem we have to ask ourselves, is it productive? Is it life-affirming? Is that identity life-affirming? Is that identity counterhegemonic? Because what we're experiencing contemporarily is that Mother Nature is fighting against capitalist organization and socialization. The way we structure our life, nature cannot sustain it anymore. With climate change, global warming, nature cannot sustain it. So what is required of the human species is an alternative way of organizing the world. And where is that alternative means of organizing the world going to come from? Remember, our Haitian ancestors, what we fail to realize, we always associate the Haitian Revolution with Toussaint Dessalines, Pétion, etc. But all they did was reproduce the capitalist system in Haiti. We never look at Sans Souci and what the Africans did, because the Africans established an alternative system to capitalism. We call it the Lakou system. It wasn't only a reaction against capitalism, but it grew out of our African voodoo metaphysics. That's where it comes from. So what I will end with this. What we have to ask ourselves, the different identities we see in the Haitian communities, the African American communities, whether it's the black bourgeoisie, as E. Franklin Frazier called it, the black middle class, the underclass identity, the my nigga. In fact, it's come to the point where we embrace a term that was used to denigrate us. We embrace the my nigga identity. We call, what's up, my nigga? We've embraced that. But the thing we have to ask ourselves, is it life-affirming, and can we use it to counter capitalist exploitation? We could use the Lakou system to counter capitalist exploitation. Because the Lakou, everyone had a piece of land, and you weren't allowed to be exploited because you could grow your own food, etc. So the mentality was subsistence living and the sustainability of the environment. So can we count on the bourgeois identity, the contemporary bourgeois identity, to fight against climate change and global warming? Can we count on the my nigga identity to fight against climate change, global warming? Can we constitute a new form of system and social integration? Because that's what's required of us. To do so, we have to look to our ancestors. I do not believe the my nigga Haitian identity is counter-hegemonic. For me, we have to go back to the Lakou system and build off of the Lakou system to establish a new form of social system, not only for Haitians, but for everybody. Because the European took his experience and extrapolated as universal for everyone. So we can do the same thing. We need a new form of system and social integration that will fight against capitalist exploitation. If not, we all die. That's the bottom line. That's the new crisis that capitalism is facing. If we don't change the way we live, we all die. Bottom line, we don't have the technology currently to fight against climate change. So I will end with that. Thank you.